Hi there, my name is Timpy. I'm a watercolor artist, and on this channel I share my tips and tutorials for watercolor beginners to help them in their art journey. If you are a beginner, you're in the right place. In today's tutorial, I would be showing you how to paint an autumn leaf, which was one of the first autumn leaves of the season that I picked up during my morning walks. So I would be painting this maple leaf in loose watercolor style, and throughout the tutorial I'm going to be offering tips and techniques which you can actually pick up and implement in your own paintings for any other subjects you may paint. So make sure you watch the video till the end so you do not miss out on any of these techniques, and this will also help me and my channel tremendously. I have used student grade art supplies for this painting because I didn't want to use very high quality materials because this was intended for beginners. So if you want to see what materials I have used, please check the description box below where I have provided all the details. It is always a good idea if you do a rough sketch of your subject prior to starting to paint it, because then you know where the paint needs to stop. So as you can see, I have drawn a rough outline of my maple leaf using HB pencil. I'm not darkening it too much because I don't want these lines to show after the paint's been done, because I would not be able to erase those lines. So I'm also adding some shadow lines so I know where I need to paint my shadows, and that totally depends on where your light source is. So I've got the leaf right in front of me and I can see that the shadows are falling to the right. Okay, so our sketch is ready, and before we start painting it, it'll be a good idea to prepare your paints in advance. We would be using a limited color palette for this painting. And I've got my sap green, cadmium red and yellow ochre color ready for application. To start off, we're going to do a first layer of yellow ochre color, wet on dry. For those of you who are new to this terminology, wet on dry simply means that you're applying wet paint on dry paper. I hope that clarifies. It's as simple as that. And in the next stage, I'm applying a wet on wet wash. Right now, I'm just dropping in some orange color on my wet yellow underlayer. So the underlayer is still wet and I'm applying wet paint, so that's basically wet on wet application. And the advantage of wet on wet application is that you get smooth edges, no hard edges as such, and that's why you need to be really careful that and make sure that the underlayer is still wet. You do not want hard edges. And I'm just dropping in some green color as well now. And I'm looking at my reference picture to identify the areas where I want the greens and oranges to be, but you need not copy it exactly because we are painting in loose style. This is not a realistic painting, so just be free and let the paint move wherever it is actually, but just define the main areas. So obviously once the painting dries out, watercolor do tend to fade out a bit. That's why we may have to apply further layers. I'm also adding a tinge of Alizarin crimson hue in certain areas because I can see some reddish tone as well in my leaf, and that will just create some more interesting contrast in my leaf. So yeah, feel free to do that looking at your reference picture. You can also sprinkle some salt in certain area while the underlayer is still wet, and this can create some really interesting results. Obviously that's not very predictable but if you want to opt out of these techniques, it's absolutely alright if you don't feel comfortable in the first go. I also splattered a little bit of clean water, and that's going to create some interesting blooms when the paints dry out. So before we start the second layer, we'll let our leaf completely dry, and as you can see, it dried out and has created some really interesting textures and effects. And I'd like to just brighten it up with another layer of color, so I'm re-wetting the whole leaf with just clean water. And we're going to repeat the same process that we did earlier on, but yeah, this time I'm using a much thicker consistency of cadmium red color just to make it a bit more brighter. And you need not cover the whole leaf with color. You can leave the underlayer to really show up and only put color in the areas where you want the color to be a bit darker. Because we wet the leaf completely with water before starting to paint again, we're going to get smooth edges as we're painting wet on wet. So if you're not fond of painting loose and you're more fond of painting realistic leaves, I have done a tutorial on 5 different types of leaves, autumn leaves, which I did in the last season, and those are all realistic, where I show you step by step how to paint all of them. So if you want to try realistic leaves, I'll leave the link in the description down below so you can check those out. But I really like the unpredictability of watercolors and the loose effects and the variations that it creates, and that's why I wanted to try this out in a different style. We can actually add some veins in our leaf using a toothpick, and that will work best when the paint is still wet. So as you can see, the colors tends to seep in the little scratch marks that we've created using a toothpick. And it's a very simple way. You don't really need to worry about the thickness of the veins. Alternatively, you can use a very thin brush and paint in the veins using a darker color. It's entirely up to you. If you're not comfortable using a toothpick, please go ahead and use a thinner brush. And as you can see, I'm re-wetting certain areas of my leaf because I can see that the paint is sort of dried up, and this technique would not work if the paper is dry. So it's always a good idea to paint and then use the toothpick technique. I've done a detailed tutorial on painting summer leaves using simple brush strokes, so you must check that out if you're fond of painting leaves like me. So now we are starting to paint the shadow of the leaf. So this step is really important if you want to create a 3-dimensional leaf. And I'm just using some diluted Paynes grey color to create this. We did draw the sketch of the shadow earlier on, and that makes it really easy for us to really just drop that color in. And I'm using a thin brush to do this. It's size 2 pointed brush. So as you can see, that watercolor is really a versatile medium, and what I like most about it is the magic it creates after it dries out. You can't really predict how it's going to look after it's dried out, especially with a loose technique. and that's why I'm sometimes drawn towards the loose technique, and sometimes I'm more tempted to draw in a realistic style. It just keeps varying. So I've covered tutorials on both styles, so you can pick up the style you want. I also conduct online watercolor classes on a weekly basis in small groups. Leave a comment down below if you would be interested in joining this class. I paint in real time along with my students during this class, and I provide them detailed feedback after they've created their artwork. Before we finish off, it's always a good idea to do some splatters to add some interest to your background, but this step is completely optional. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and don't forget to hit the notification bell to get notified about future videos. I will come back with another tutorial very soon. Till then, take care. Bye.